Hi everyone, my name is Apuraj Garakapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Apai. Someone like him leading a club, it was honestly hard to believe she was even an academy employee with how openly she looked down on him. All because he was a special admission student. Jeoma chose to ignore her condescending attitude and calmly told her to process the application as long as it met the requirements. Instead of complying, the woman stood up and loomed over him, making it clear she wasn't going to make things easy. She pointed out that forming a club required a faculty advisor, and from what she could see, Jeoma didn't have a professor willing to take that role. When Jeoma asked her to clarify, her meaning was obvious. She believed that no professor would ever agree to support a club founded by someone with his background. In her eyes, his attempt to create a club was pointless from the start. This kind of attitude didn't surprise Jeoma much. Whatever small amount of goodwill he still had left for the academy was quickly fading. After nearly 20 years working in the service industry, he had dealt with plenty of unpleasant people, and he knew that staying quiet was usually the best way to handle them. Still, that didn't stop him from wanting to punch her right then and there. Instead, he pulled out his phone and called someone who could deal with the situation. He calmly told the person on the other end that he was in the administrative office trying to submit his club registration. The woman immediately snapped at him for daring to take a call in front of her, but the person on the line simply said they were nearby and would arrive shortly. Jeoma ended the call, and the woman seized the chance to scold him even more. Going on about how disrespectful he was, Jeoma warned her to just follow proper procedure since the person he called was already on their way. Too busy yelling, she failed to notice her coworkers lowering their heads and avoiding eye contact. She continued, boasting, claiming she was related to a close friend of the headmaster and had the authority to have someone like Jeoma expelled whenever she wanted. That was enough to make Jeoma chuckle. Leaning slightly forward, he told her to lower her voice because it was getting annoying. That pushed her over the edge, and her expression twisted into something completely unhinged, revealing what Jeoma called her true face. At that exact moment, the door burst open, startling everyone in the room. Standing in the broken doorway was an extremely angry headmistress. Jeoma casually told the woman to show respect to his club advisor. The headmistress, Medea, smiled warmly at Jeoma, clearly happy to see him again. He tried to apologize for causing trouble, but she brushed it off, saying she would come running anytime he called for her. Hearing Jeoma's name finally made the woman realize who she had been talking to all along. The academy's top freshman. Medea cheerfully told Jeoma to leave the paperwork and focus on preparing for his written exams, assuring him that she would handle everything from here. Once Jeoma left, Medea's demeanor completely changed. Another staff member hurried over with a chair for her, and the woman tried to explain herself, claiming there had been a misunderstanding. Medea didn't even need to use her blessing to understand what had happened. The woman had mocked Jeoma's background, and of all people, she chose someone personally selected by both Medea and the swordmaster. Without saying much, Medea used her blessing to place a resignation letter in front of the woman, and told her to start writing it within 5 minutes. With the situation handled, she later messaged Jeoma, telling him that the club application had gone smoothly and that they only needed one more member. As for the woman, Jeoma assumed she had been fired, but he didn't feel even a bit of sympathy for her. Medea also told him to visit her office after class. After that, Jeoma went to see the person who had become both his enemy and ally, the blacksmith Volander. He had come to collect his equipment, and Volander told him to wait for a moment. This time, the blacksmith actually looked like a proper craftsman at work, though Jeoma wasn't sure how Volander felt about him anymore. As someone who had played the game before, Jeoma had always had mixed feelings about him. But after everything that had happened, the negative side had definitely grown stronger. Even so, he couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for him. In the game, Volander was one of the main NPCs responsible for almost every aspect of equipment upgrades. Like most characters in games like this, he was someone players either loved or hated. He had a reputation for draining players' money because of how luck-based his enhancements were. Jeoma himself had been a light spender in his previous life, so he couldn't fully relate, but he knew that heavy spenders would go to extreme lengths, praying for luck, and hoping Volander would finally favor them. In reality, though, most players just cursed him whenever their upgrades failed. Even Gyoma had done the same when his Morasama had been downgraded from a B rank to an E rank. Volander snapped Gyoma out of his thoughts and asked what he was thinking about. Then, with clear pride, he presented the newly upgraded weapon, confidently claiming that this time, his craftsmanship had reached perfection. The sword looked completely different now, polished, refined, and almost gleaming with a fresh presence. On top of that, it even came with additional special options, which immediately pleased Gyoma. The Morasama now carried the effect known as Scattered Rain, and seeing the sword in its new state made Gyoma instinctively praise Volander like a god for the insane luck that had finally come his way. Thanks to this enhancement, Gyoma's painless blessing had also improved, extending its duration from 40 seconds to 50 seconds. Before, he had already felt that 40 seconds wouldn't be enough for future dungeon runs, so gaining an extra 10 seconds made a significant difference. Considering that he planned to combine it with the blessing of transition later on, the benefits would only increase as his armament level rose. Overall, this was undeniably a huge advantage for him. Despite all the complaints he had in the past, the painless blessing was proving to be extremely versatile for a spirit-level ability. The sword had now been upgraded to D grade after everything that went into it. The result wasn't as high as Gyoma had hoped, since he used materials from an A-grade monster like the Buffalo King. He had expected at least a C-grade result. Still, considering that he would be channeling aura through Morasama frequently, increasing its durability by 2 grades was still a solid improvement. At the very least, it wouldn't shatter mid-combat anymore. While examining his status screen, Gyoma noticed a flashing button that seemed to be urging him to press it. He had a bad feeling about it, but pressed it anyway. New information appeared immediately. Because of the successful reinforcement and the weapon's high growth potential, the sword could now gain up to 3 special abilities. However, these abilities required magic stones to activate, and their effects would be random. Magic stones were extremely rare, and Gyoma couldn't hide his shock that strengthening his weapon further would now depend on something so difficult to obtain. At the same time, elsewhere, an elder working alongside a demon commander smashed a drinking cup into a mirror. He then continued drinking straight from the bottle, before throwing it aside as well. His gaze drifted upward toward a portrait hanging above, showing his father, Lehman von Bemhark, one of the 7-star heroes known as the Mad Tiger. 40 years ago, Lehman had died in battle during the campaign against the 6th Legion commander, Vasman. Society had celebrated him as a noble hero, but in reality, his death had triggered chaos within the family. Afterward, numerous relatives attempted to assassinate his son in their greed to take control of the Bemhark family. To survive, he had to harden himself completely, abandoning any sense of softness. Instead of being eliminated, he manipulated those same relatives into destroying each other. In the end, he managed to restore his family's crumbling foundation. By the age of 30, he had risen to become an elder of Jokwon Academy, dedicating himself to guiding humanity, while maintaining the dominance of the ruling class. For him, demons served as the perfect justification for that power, giving humanity a constant enemy to rally against. However, there were always unpredictable variables that threatened to disrupt everything. One of those variables was Leon von Reinhardt, a hero candidate born with the potential to defeat the Demon King. Even so, given the overwhelming difference in power between humans and demons, the chances of Leon actually succeeding were almost non-existent. The existence of figures like Lyson, the 1st Legion commander, who had once been sealed by the legendary hero Valor Jokwon, had already set the standard for how powerful true legends were. Then, one day, a woman approached him with an offer to personally deal with the so-called hero candidate. She appeared to be nothing more than an instructor, and at first he questioned how someone so far beneath him could dare to speak so casually. But the moment their eyes met, he understood the truth. She was the one holding power in that exchange. She was a human who had willingly abandoned her own kind to form a contract with a Legion commander, making her a half-human, half-demon, a villain. Things had already been complicated enough with Leon alone, but now an additional problem had emerged in the form of a lowborn special admission student, Kang Gyoma, who was disrupting everything even further. Even the auditory family seemed hesitant to act, claiming they lacked sufficient justification. Frustrated, Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing a Pie grow naturally. The elder, Claddy van Baemhark, finally gave an order, telling his subordinate to summon the undertakers. The next day in class, Gyoma quietly scribbled his thoughts into a notebook. His mind focused almost entirely on one thing: the fact that the Murasama now required magic stones to grow stronger. The gap between weapons with magic stones and those without them was massive. Having a weapon with 3 slots for special abilities was basically hitting the jackpot. The problem was that magic stones only dropped from specific dungeon bosses, and usually from a rank or higher demonic beasts, which were essentially demonoids in everything but name. At this point, it almost fell like Gyoma was cursed to keep fighting demonoids if he wanted to get stronger. He even jokes to himself that maybe it was because the word demon was part of his name. He glanced over at Ryozo, who was sleeping peacefully with her usual odd-eye mask on, and wondered if she had stayed up all night again. It had already been a week since they cleared the dungeon together as a club. The key required to open the stone gate in the Buffalo King's area was also a magic stone, specifically one that came from a colossal beast known as a gigant. Somehow, someone had already managed to kill a gigant and take its stone. Even in the game, gigants were portrayed as monsters so powerful that a single step could shake the earth, and even they were nothing compared to the creatures introduced in later updates, beings that were basically natural disasters given form. Gyoma paused for a moment to seriously consider whether it was worth risking his life just to add special abilities to his weapon. Hunting demonic beasts for magic stones was supposed to be Leon's role, not his. While he was deep in thought, Chloe entered the classroom and greeted him. She noticed Ryozo sleeping in the seat she would have preferred, but she didn't comment on it. Gyoma asked if she had fully recovered, and she confirmed that she was feeling much better. Even so, Gyoma himself had clearly taken a toll after releasing that blue light from his weapon. Before Chloe could say anything more about it, he cut her off, making it clear they shouldn't discuss it further. The blue light she mentioned was aura, something only truly powerful individuals could use. Thinking about it again, Gyoma started to feel like farming magic stones might actually be worth the risk. Despite his earlier hesitation, he now found himself craving more strength. At some point, he had completely let go of any thoughts about living peacefully or safely. Still, his core goal hadn't changed. He just wanted to survive. The problem was that things kept happening that never existed in the original game, and those unknown variables were constantly targeting him. The storyline he once knew was becoming more and more distorted, almost as if the world itself refused to leave him alone. It had already been a month since he enrolled at the academy, and the truth about the second human demon war, which would begin in 3 years, would soon come to light. Strengthening himself and upgrading his weapon were no longer optional choices. They were necessities. At this rate, he couldn't even trust Leon as the hero candidate to carry the future. The fact that a demonoid mermaid had managed to defeat him in a single attack felt almost pathetic. The entire situation was exhausting to even think about. He was so deep in thought that he didn't notice Speed Weapon approaching until Ryozo suddenly punched him in the face, snapping him back to reality. Speed Weapon had come to ask about the club registration, and Gyoma confirmed that the headmaster had approved it. They just needed one more member to officially start. Weapon then shared some news. Leon had been going on a rampage lately, clearing high-ranking dungeons non-stop. It seemed like Leon was finally starting to act like a proper protagonist, making Gyoma reconsider his earlier doubts. There were even rumors that Leon had cleared an A-ranked dungeon just the previous day with a small party, while Gyoma's group had barely managed to get through a C-ranked dungeon. Speed Weapon also pointed out that Ryozo seemed unusually well informed about Leon, making it pretty obvious that she had feelings for him. Instead of answering directly, Ryozo briefly glanced at Gyoma before turning away and stating that she was no longer interested in Leon. Leon's growth was undeniable, and at this pace, he would likely obtain Bamong during the upcoming Survival Island training. Thinking about it more logically, Gyoma realized that surviving this long with nothing but a sashimi knife was already something close to a miracle. It was possible that his very existence had been diverting attention and danger away from Leon. Even if that was true, Gyoma had no intention of just accepting it. His survival depended on it. He would cut down anything that stood in his way. He had no desire to act like a flawless hero, and he wasn't the protagonist of this world. Under his breath, he muttered that he would slice through anything that blocked his path. Ryozo overheard him and casually asked if he was into anime, since that line sounded exactly like something out of a game or a show. Elsewhere, a group of dangerous-looking individuals walked through the academy halls, following a maid who led them deeper inside. One of them muttered in disbelief, wondering how their group had ended up receiving a request from the elders of Jokwin Academy. At this rate, if jobs like this kept coming, they might as well become a fully recognized assassination organization. Their boss, a woman with short silver hair, immediately shut him up, warning him to keep quiet unless he wanted his teeth knocked out. Another thug leaned over and whispered that since he was new, he didn't understand yet. Their boss hated elites more than anything, but even with that, the payout for this job was simply too good to turn down. As their chatter continued, the boss repeated herself, this time more firmly, ordering everyone to stay silent. Eventually, they arrived at the office of the elder who had summoned them. The maid knocked and called out, and after receiving permission, they stepped inside. Leading the group were Jang Taepeng, the deputy leader, Farik, a low-level grunt, and their boss, Leshen. The three of them were members of the Undertaker Syndicate, a mercenary alliance made up of villains. The elder thanked them for making the trip and immediately got to business. He instructed the maid to hand over a file, which contained detailed information about Kang Jeoma. One of the men looked confused, questioning why they were being given information about some random student. The elder ignored the question and stated the objective clearly. Their task was to eliminate Jeoma during next week's Survival Island training. If they succeeded, they would receive 100 million upfront as agreed, along with an additional bonus upon completion. Leshen asked how the body should be disposed of, and the elder responded coldly, telling them to dump him into the ocean surrounding the island, and let the sharks and fish take care of the rest. The day of the written exam arrived, and Jeoma sat with a sandwich in hand, casually reviewing the material. He had already performed well in the midterms, so he didn't feel the need to go all out this time. However, since the rankings would be publicly displayed, he knew he couldn't afford to slack off either, especially when two of his own club members consistently ranked first and second. He couldn't allow himself to fall behind. While studying, his phone buzzed with a message from Ryuzo, reminding him to eat a proper breakfast before the exam. Jeoma replied simply that he had already eaten a sandwich. That immediately triggered a long rant from her about the importance of sugar intake, along with an enthusiastic breakdown of why Gang was the perfect food for situations like this. It honestly felt like she specialized in spouting nonsense first thing in the morning, which made it even more confusing how she managed to top the academic rankings. Jeoma responded by mentioning that his country also had traditional sweets meant for exams, which instantly caught her interest. But before she could go deeper into it, he abruptly ended the conversation by telling her to just eat shit. She began spamming his phone with messages, asking what he meant, but Jeoma had already set his phone to silent and ignored everything. He had no intention of dealing with her nonsense any further and instead focused on preparing for the exam, determined not to lose to the Gang fanatic. That determination didn't last long, though, because the reality was that Jeoma wasn't exactly brilliant academically. While the answers after the exam, Chloe approached him and asked how he did. He casually said he had guessed most of the answers, though in truth, he had barely managed by relying on knowledge from the game. Still, he figured he must have done better than Chloe, at least. He then asked her if she had heard anything from Nox or received any updates. She explained that her brother had called the previous evening, but she had missed it because she had been asleep. The call had come around 7 p.m., and since she had stayed up all night studying, she ended up sleeping through it. Knowing Chloe, Jeoma suspected she might have ignored it intentionally. Since the contact information of the auditor family was classified, the only way Jeoma could get information was through Chloe, unless Nox reached out directly. There was clearly some awkward tension between the siblings, and Jeoma couldn't help but feel that siblings should normally have a better relationship than that. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Up High grow naturally. Meanwhile, Speedweapon loudly complained about how he had studied for days without sleeping, only to still lose to Ryozo in exam rankings again. As he spiraled into frustration, Ryozo casually walked over and sat closer to Gioma. Curious about what he and Chloe were discussing, she bluntly asked if the two of them were dating. While Chloe immediately started drifting into her own imagination, Gioma quickly shut that idea down, clarifying that it wasn't anything like that. Ryozo leaned in even closer and questioned why he kept ignoring her messages if he didn't even have a girlfriend. Gioma defended himself, saying it only happened once, and that he wasn't constantly ghosting her. Before the conversation could continue, Chloe interrupted, clearly irritated after hearing that Gioma and Ryozo had been texting. Gioma turned toward her as she called his name in an eerily calm tone, only to find her staring at them with a full yandere expression. With an unsettling calmness, she questioned him about why he had been messaging Ryozo at all. Chloe's sudden outburst completely shocked Gioma. Just a moment ago, she hadn't reacted at all when he and Ryozo were sitting right next to each other. Yet now she was losing control over something as simple as a text. Even Speedweapon couldn't understand why her attitude had flipped so abruptly. While Ryozo, instead of being concerned, actually found the situation entertaining, she teased Gioma, asking him why Chloe was acting like that. But Gioma immediately warned her to step back before she made things worse. For all of them, Ryozo ignored him completely and kept pressing him, repeatedly asking why Chloe was suddenly behaving like that. Even though it was obvious she already understood the reason, it was clear that she knew exactly what was going on with Chloe, but she chose to keep provoking the situation for her own amusement, completely unaware of how dangerous Chloe's yandere side was about to become. Chloe had clearly reached her limit watching the two of them interact so casually. She stopped holding back and confronted the issue directly. Gioma had never even given her his phone number, and yet he was already texting freely with Ryozo. Gioma tried to explain that Chloe's number was confidential, but she refused to listen. Her focus was entirely on the fact that Gioma had once promised that he would be her one and only prince. At the same time, Ryozo clung tightly to Gioma's arm, full of curiosity about what was happening. While Gioma struggled to explain things under the heavy waves of killing intent coming from Chloe, he bluntly told Ryozo that Chloe was a yandere, but Ryozo pretended not to know what that meant. Speedweapon immediately stepped in, grabbing Ryozo by the face and pulling her away from Gioma since he clearly understood how serious the situation actually was. Chloe then pulled out her legendary box cutter, fully entering her yandere state and preparing to cut down everything in front of her. This time was clearly different from before, and Gioma had no idea how to handle it. He realized that he had been slacking on researching yandere behavior on Neo Tube, and now he was completely unprepared to deal with her. Chloe slowly stepped toward him, declaring that from now on, she would make sure he would only ever look at her. Without giving him even a moment to react, she suddenly rushed forward and slashed at him with the box cutter. At that point, even Ryozo understood that the situation had become seriously dangerous. Chloe continued attacking him with repeated slashes, while ranting about how Gioma always made her sad. She accused him of constantly spending time with other girls and flirting with them, instead of staying by her side. One of her swings missed Gioma entirely and instead went straight toward Ryozo, who was standing behind him. Gioma reacted instantly, knocking Chloe's hand aside before the blade could reach Ryozo. Immediately after that, he forced Chloe down onto a table and pinned her there, standing on top of her to stop her from struggling. Speedweapon and Ryozo both stared in shock as Gioma tried to calm her down, with Ryozo looking especially irritated at what she was seeing. While holding Chloe down, Gioma tried to get her to talk to him. She kept trying to push him away, but her strength was already fading with him restraining her. Even then, she refused to listen. She pointed out that all this time, he never even wanted to stay in touch. Yet now he suddenly wanted to talk. Gioma leaned in closer and told her that he wanted to talk to her face to face instead of through something like a phone. That seemed to calm her slightly as he leaned in even further, determined to settle everything right there. He thanked her for always thinking about him. That was enough to completely overwhelm Chloe. She entered a full yandere overload state, and even Speedweapon started blushing at how intense Gioma's riz was. Once Chloe was fully immobilized, Gioma stood back up and reminded her of their time in the Buffalo Dungeon, how he had relied on her, and how they had fought together. They had shared many experiences already, so there was no need for her to get this upset so easily. With Chloe finally calmed down, Jeoma took the opportunity to step away, relieved that he had somehow managed to handle the situation. Speed Weapon asked him if he was okay, but Ryoso stayed completely silent, clearly disappointed by everything that had just happened. The conversation shifted, and Jeoma suggested that they clean up and head out. Ryoso left the room shortly after. Later, as Ryoso and Speed Weapon walked back toward their dorms, both of them had Jeoma on their minds. From what they had seen so far, it was obvious that whenever the topic of Jeoma came up, Chloe would give off a murderous aura. It didn't take much to understand that Chloe had very strong feelings for him. However, those feelings were clearly twisted into something far more dangerous than normal affection. What surprised them even more was Jeoma himself. Behind his calm words and gentle actions, he always kept his sashimi knife ready. He tried to resolve situations through persuasion first, but it was obvious that he was prepared to switch to violence at any moment. If necessary, he understood how to use the threat of violence when needed. At a glance, that might make him seem like a villain, but in reality, those were qualities of someone capable of ruling. Speed Weapon had already believed in him before, but now he was completely certain that Jeoma was destined for greatness. While thinking about all this, Speed Weapon noticed Ryoso aggressively tapping on her phone. She had been making irritated expressions for a while, clearly bothered by something, but she didn't want to explain it. So instead, he asked her why she kept messing with her phone like that. She revealed that she was deleting a video from her NeoTube channel titled The Perfect Way to Deal with a Yandere, which was the same video Jeoma had been using to deal with Chloe. Although Speed Weapon didn't know that, even though the video had over 200,000 views and was clearly doing well, she still insisted on deleting it, saying she didn't need it anymore. After that, Speed Weapon changed the topic, and the two of them continued chatting as they walked across the campus. Elsewhere in the academy library, Jeoma sat among other cadets, flipping through a stack of books. Starting next Wednesday, a deserted island survival training was scheduled to take place on Avalon Island, lasting for 3 days and 2 nights. From the name alone, it sounded like a serious survival camp, yet cadets were only allowed to form teams of 1 to 4 people. The academy had even released an official announcement with all the detailed information to every cadet. Because of that, the whole event felt less like a harsh survival test and more like a school activity, something closer to camping or a structured outing. Jeoma was going through multiple survival guidebooks, trying to better understand how to manage himself during the training trip. Since it was labeled as survival training, the academy would be evaluating each cadet's level of self-sufficiency. However, the final outcome of the training wouldn't actually affect their grades. Thinking about it more carefully, even for Jeoma, who had experienced everything as a player of the game, this particular training event had left a strong impression on him. It was a major part of the main storyline where the protagonist would acquire the hilt of Balmon, the main weapon tied to the hero. During that same island training event, there would also be an incident that triggered the development of feelings between Abel and Leon. Back when he played the game, Jeoma had been deeply invested in that part of the story, but now things were different. After entering the academy and going through constant danger and life-threatening situations, he had grown cynical about things like romance. With the academy elders targeting him and a mysterious instructor also involved, there was simply too much happening for him to even consider something like love. No matter how beautiful Abel was, this wasn't the kind of situation where he could afford to develop feelings. Love could wait for another life. In this life, as a swordsman, what truly interested him was the holy demon sword Balmon. Maybe it was because of his nature as a swordsman, but he couldn't stop himself from wanting that weapon. As someone who used to play the game, he already knew where Balmon was located and what kind of power it held. However, collecting the scattered pieces of Balmon was a crucial part of the story's progression. Even if he knew the locations of all those pieces, he still wouldn't be able to obtain them. The condition for acquiring Balmon, a weapon that chooses its own master, required the manifestation of the blessing of miracle. That essentially meant the weapon was designed exclusively for the protagonist. Compared to that, Jeoma, who still relied on. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Pie grow naturally. a sashimi knife, was nowhere near worthy. Instead of wasting time longing for something impossible, it made more sense for him to focus on what he actually needed to survive those 3 days on the island. Because of what had happened on Skopje Island earlier, the Academy director had made a special request for the Sword Emperor to join as a guest instructor for the Wolf class. The strongest hero in the world would now be guiding a group of first-year students on what was essentially the camping trip. The main storyline had already changed quite a bit, but at least this development meant Gyoma could pursue his goals with a bit more safety than before. Gyoma moved toward another shelf to grab more books, hoping to find something useful. He hadn't come to the library just to read basic survival tips that he could easily look up online. He was searching for something very specific related to Avalon Island. He picked up a book that covered the island's history and began reading through it. Avalon Island was located in the far western sea, known as a mystical place where the terrain constantly shifted. At the very center of the island was an ancient body of water called the Queen's Lake, and certain tribes referred to it as the Land of Beginnings. At present, the island remained completely uninhabited. All of this information was already familiar to Gyoma, which meant he would likely need to go through a large portion of the library to find exactly what he was looking for. As he continued searching through the books, a voice suddenly called out to him, and a firm hand gently rested on his shoulder. It was Leon. The blonde protagonist greeted Gyoma with a faint smile. Behind them, a group of girls reacted with excitement at the mere sight of Leon, but Gyoma's attention was fixed on the book Leon was holding. It was an introductory book on magic, suggesting that Leon was trying to improve after what happened during the midterms. Even so, something felt off. The protagonist shouldn't have been sitting in the library studying magic at this particular moment. Gyoma found himself growing suspicious of the situation. Leon tasks what kind of books Gyoma had been reading. Gyoma explained that he was simply trying to learn more about Avalon Island for the upcoming training. Leon commented that Gyoma seemed surprisingly diligent, and Gyoma couldn't deny that. Between physical training, dungeon exploration, and studying magical beasts, his daily life had become extremely busy. Knowing what would happen in 3 years, Gyoma had been doing everything he could to prepare in advance for his own survival. In the end, everything he was doing was for his own sake. Leon thought about that for a moment before saying that the two of them were different. That statement reminded Gyoma of the earlier moment when Leon had asked him where he came from. On the surface, Leon wasn't behaving much differently from how he had in the game, but something about him still felt off. Compared to the version of Leon that Gyoma remembered, this one seemed slightly different. There was a faint trace of sadness in his expression, along with a sense of inner conflict in his demeanor. Before Gyoma could properly analyze what was going on, Leon suddenly stood up and wished him a safe trip home. With that, he left. There was definitely something unusual about the protagonist. Perhaps it was the burden of being the hero, someone who carried the fate of humanity on his shoulders. But whatever it was, it clearly weighed heavily on him. After Leon left, Gyoma returned his focus to the books, continuing his search for the information he needed before the library closed. The day of the survival training finally arrives, and students gather at the training grounds for the orientation. Abel and Rachel walk over and meet up with Ryozo and Chloe, and just like that, Gyoma's 4 wives end up facing each other in a brief but tense stare down. A bit of small talk starts between Abel and Ryozo, but before anything meaningful can come out of it, Rachel jumps in and cuts through the tension. She bluntly brings up how Ryozo transferred into Gyoma's class, and is basically trying to steal him behind their backs. Before Rachel can push that accusation too far, Abel quickly interrupts her to stop things from escalating, but Rachel doesn't hold back at all. Instead, she raises her voice even more, pointing out that Ryozo not only went to a dungeon with Gyoma, but also formed a club with him, and now there's even a chance she'll spend 2 nights and 3 days with him on the survival island. Ryozo steps in and shuts that down by saying that Gyoma himself stated he plans to do the training alone. His reasoning was that there are things he wants to try out by himself, so he intends to take on the entire island solo. Hearing that immediately excites Rachel, because it means Gyoma will be completely alone for the full 3 days. That's when Rachel comes up with a game for the four of them to play while they're out on the island. Even though Gioma said he wants to go alone, there's no rule that says he can't be found, so Rachel introduces something she calls the Rachel game, which gives one lucky girl a chance to spend time alone with him. Since Avalon Island has terrain that constantly changes, and even though they'll use a spatial gate to get there, everyone will be dropped at completely random locations. Just meeting up with each other will be difficult, and forming proper teams will be even harder. Because of that, the game is simple. Whoever finds Gioma first wins, and the other three have to give up. The one who finds him gets to completely monopolize him. If the girls run into each other, they can either team up or split off however they want, but they must not interfere with each other's chances. All of them agree to the rules, but Avalon immediately turns bright red at the thought of monopolizing Gioma. She refuses to take part in the game altogether. That only makes things better for the others, since it reduces the number of competitors. Meanwhile, the man at the center of all this, Gioma himself, is struggling just to stay awake. He spent way too long in the library the previous day and barely got any rest. He had already written down everything he needed to know on his phone and came fully prepared, carrying 24 sashimi knives along with a hidden secret weapon. On top of that, Medea kept messaging him constantly like an overprotective parent, making sure he was properly prepared for the trip, and even reminding him to bring some extra pairs of underwear. At this point, she felt more like a grandmother than a school director. Before heading out, Gioma takes a moment to scan the training grounds, carefully observing the teacher's presence. He's specifically looking for a tall female instructor with purple hair and purple eyes. He doesn't know her exact intentions, but if she's targeting him, then this deserted island training would be the perfect opportunity for her to make a move. The constantly shifting terrain of the island would also make it easy to clean up any evidence afterward. Of course, that logic applies to Gioma as well. Still, he isn't comfortable with the idea of using a knife against a person, but at the same time, he can't just sit around and let himself get killed either. The real problem is identifying the correct person, because for some reason, there are way too many women with purple hair and eyes around, as if everyone had been dipped in food coloring at birth. His thoughts get interrupted when Siegfried and Abel walk past him across the training grounds. The Sword Emperor reminds Gioma to keep working hard and aim for good results, but also tells him not to forget to rest properly and enjoy the training. After a bit of casual conversation, the two continue on their way. However, Abel lingers for a moment longer than expected, staring at Gioma before finally leaving. With a small huff, Gioma doesn't think much of it, and even lets out a small laugh, recalling from the game's storyline that she'll soon end up getting a boyfriend anyway. As he watches her walk away, he completely fails to notice Ryoso sneaking up behind him, with what she believes is a mischievous expression. That plan falls apart instantly when Gioma suddenly turns around and flicks her hard on the forehead. She yelps in pain and jumps back, completely caught off guard by the sudden hit. All she had come for was to wish him luck for the training, but now she's too annoyed to even look at him. Gioma, on the other hand, genuinely doesn't understand Ryoso at all. Lately, he hasn't even been able to sleep properly because she keeps sticking around him all the time. And if he tries to ignore her, she just gets more restless and starts pacing around like crazy. He has no clue what exactly about him caught her attention so strongly. Even so, Ryoso is still technically one of the heroines in the story. Because of that, Gioma has no intention of getting any closer to her than absolutely necessary. The spatial gate to Avalon Island finally opens, and the students are instructed to carefully pass through it as they begin their test. Gioma steps forward toward the gate, fully determined that this time he will find exactly what he's looking for and get through the entire event quietly. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Apai. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.